Hey guys, welcome to Yaks and the Stacks, a librarian podcast. My name is Catherine O'Brien. I work at the main library in youth services on level 4, and I have my friends with me.
I'm Natasha. I also work at main library. I work on levels 3 and 4 as a library assistant.
And I'm Hayden, and I also work at the main library, mostly on level 4, as a library programmer.
So every week we just talk about different topics that we choose. So this week we're talking about weird history things, kind of creepy, spooky types of things that happen here in Little Rock. This story that I actually came up with, it's really interesting how I found this story. There used to be a programmer, her name was Erin, and she trained me to be a librarian. I mean, sort of. I had worked in libraries before, but she really formed who I was as a librarian. She had a really positive attitude, and her cadence when she talked to people I really liked, and I still embody that still today. I still act like Erin sometimes when I'm talking to people. She's had really good customer service skills. One day I came into work and she was looking at this house with Google Maps. And I was like, just kind of interested in what she was doing. You know, we all hang out at the desk. And I was like, what are you looking at? And she was like, oh my God, there was a murder at this house. And she showed it to me and she's like, it's just right here, right downtown. This happened. We had a conversation about it, and I really love history and stuff. And I remember her at the end of that conversation being like, I hope that's not weird. 3 years later, when we were talking about ideas for this podcast, I was still thinking about that conversation that we had. And I reached out to Erin through Facebook and asked if she remembered talking about this with me. And amazingly, she did, and didn't think I was a super weirdo for asking. And so she shared some of that information so that I could kind of talk about it. Hey, didn't you get to say hi to her once? She came.
Yeah.
She
came to visit, and I got to say hi, and it was super cool.
When she dropped off those Canadian snacks.
Yeah.
I didn't see her, but I did see the snacks.
So I'm going to kind of go through this. It's a lot, okay? It's kind of dark. So this is your quick little warning. If you don't like learning about death, I mean, I'm not going to go into any of the really gruesome details, but I think it's important to say real quick that if you don't like to talk about death or murder, or specifically if the topic of suicide freaks you out, you might want to skip this episode. But like I said, we're not going to get into anything too bad or too gory here. So we're talking about the Markles. So the Markle family lived on Main Street here in Little Rock. And it was in the historic governor's, I think it was like the governor's mansion neighborhood. And basically what happened is that he killed his wife and his 2 daughters. He shot them. The story is pretty interesting because basically he worked for Stevens Incorporated. So he worked at Stevens Building is what I'm assuming. I don't know that for sure, but it sure sounds like it to me. And he was like a analyst of some kind. He was like well-liked and widely respected. He was known for loving his wife and 2 young daughters. He was like an influential businessman, basically. He was kind of like a funny guy, and he was known to be like kind of a jokester and kind of crazy, sometimes eccentric. And his mom, actually, an interesting thing about his mom was she was a winner of an Academy Award in 1950 as Best Supporting Actress. She was in All the King's Men, and she was also, my favorite thing, the sinister voice of the demon in the 1973 horror film, The Exorcist.
What?
Yeah, she was the voice of the demon, his mother.
That is insane. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And she's from here? She's from Arkansas?
I don't know exactly. I'm going to go ahead and assume maybe they were from out of town and he just moved his family here. I don't know. I think it's really interesting. One quick little aside is that a lot of people say that the movie The Exorcist was cursed, and that people that were associated with that movie had bad things happen to them in their lives. So he had kind of an interesting life. He grew up with a mom who was really in show business, and that'll come up later on in the story. He married his wife, Christine, and she was part of the Quapaw Quarter neighborhood and community activities, and she volunteered with the Girl Scouts, and she was just really a great mom and a good wife, and was involved in all kinds of stuff. His youngest daughter was named Suzanne. She was in 4th grade at Gibbs Magnet. His older daughter's name was Amy, and she was in the 8th grade. And I mean, they were both just really good kids. There was just nothing that showed in this family that there was anything wrong, basically. While he was working for the Stevens company or whatever, he did some things where he got in trouble. He made some deals. He did some like secret stuff behind the scenes. I don't fully understand what happened, but he was like doing some basically like insider trading kind of thing. And he got caught, and he got in trouble for doing that. And other Stevens representatives confronted Markle. These people confronted him, and he was placed on medical leave. I don't know why he was placed on medical leave. I don't know, but it caused the company to lose a lot of money, and he was placed on medical leave. They cited his history of having heart problems, and he suffered a heart attack. I guess maybe it was better than saying, hey, you lied and got in trouble. So he ended up getting fired on November 13th, 1987. And this was only 3 days before he killed his family. So he got fired right before that because he got caught up in this insider trading type of thing. And I keep saying insider trading. I'm not 100% sure that that's exactly what it was. I just know that he did something where he got in trouble and he was confronted and then he was fired. It says here that he tried to take $800,000 of his mom's assets to be placed into a Stevens account so that I guess they could make up the money, but it didn't work. It was rejected and it just didn't work. So it was pretty bad that he got in trouble. And that kind of explains, they go on to talk about how they think that that might have played something into why he did what he did. It says that he began planning the murders as well as his own death 3 weeks before. He started like putting things together. One weird thing that happened that I thought was really interesting is that they rented 2 movies from RAO Video for a Freddy party, which it says that his daughters had planned. Their dance teacher told the person writing this article. One was A Nightmare on Elm Street, and that movie was found in the VCR in the playroom on the 2nd floor after the murder. And it says that an employee at RAO noted that the family didn't usually rent horror movies like the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, so that was sort of weird. And then on November 15th, so just like right before the murders, a man matching John Markle's description walked into the Quapaw Gallery at 1305 Main Street. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's right across the street from RAO, if you're familiar. And he bought an expensive old man Halloween mask. The employee at that store said this. He said, "He gave me an uneasy feeling that something wasn't right," the clerk told a Gazette reporter days after the murder-suicide. So like, that's just so scary. Can you imagine you sold some guy a creepy mask and then later on you find out he killed his family? That's terrifying.
Yeah, that'd be really scary.
I mean, that clerk was probably just a teenage kid. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, that guy was sort of weird. He bought like an old man mask. He looked like he knew what he was coming in for. He looked like he was looking for it.
When he did it, he wore the mask?
Yes.
Oh, that'd be so freaky. I can't imagine being the person that sold it and...
He wore it while he was doing it. And when he was found later on, when the murders happened, it was a really stormy night. There had been storms rolling through that area for most of that evening. And remember, it was like 4 a.m. when the police finally showed up. So a lot of the neighbors just thought, when they heard gunshots, they thought it was just part of the storm. They didn't realize that somebody was actually being murdered.
Oh, that's scary.
So the police showed up at 4 a.m. when they found John. He was, I believe, downstairs, and they found the mask rolled up as if he had just taken it off next to his body. They also found a suicide note there as well, and it was in a spiral-bound diary. It was dated October 27th, 1987, a couple of weeks before his firing from Stevens. He said, "My wife, Christine, is the greatest woman alive, and my children are the very best. I'm broke, and they have no inheritance left. Christine says I put the family last, and I have. There's really only one choice now."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it gets really dark, hence the warning. Basically, as you go through this, it's a diary, and as you go through the diary, he basically talks about how he was really sad, he's had a lot of chaos in his life, things like that. Among the files released from this diary at the time was a 12-page letter from Markle to his mother that blamed her for the financial problems and personal problems that he had that ultimately led to him killing his wife and children and taking his own life. So he really blamed his mom. He basically said that she never took care of him in the letter. He basically talks about how she was too busy with her own career and didn't ever actually give him the attention that he needed. But she did receive more than half of her son's estimated $890,000 estate when he died. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, she received a lot of money after that. So it was crazy. He also talks about how when he was a kid, he took his adopted dad's name. And in the letter to his mom, he talks about how like he didn't like that. But his mom didn't realize that he didn't like that. He didn't seem to not like it when he was a kid. So obviously, moral of the story, this guy was obviously having some serious emotional problems that were never addressed. So that ended up happening. But I think it's really crazy that my pharmacy is on Main Street. So, I mean, I could have driven past this house multiple times and just never known that that had happened here. And it didn't happen that long ago. I mean, it happened, I believe, in the 80s.
So much stuff like that. You see stuff like that on TV or you hear about it happening in other places. And I don't know. It's like you don't think a crazy story like that could happen here in Little Rock, right down the street from me.
It reminds me a lot of, obviously, you can tie this to a lot of pop culture horror movies like Halloween and Scream and stuff like that. They're not exactly similar because this was someone they obviously knew. It was their dad and husband. But the whole mask thing is like a real life Halloween movie happening.
Yeah, like a real life slasher killer movie, but it's real and people actually got killed. That's crazy.
Yeah. So anytime you think that nothing crazy happens in Little Rock, it does. I am going to post in in the description of this episode, I'll post a link to the article that we're referencing. In the article on the Impact Lingers, like if you keep going through it and clicking through it, there's the last slide is called Impact Lingers. And there's a really cool picture there that you can like slide back and forth. And it's like the modern day house and the old house, what it looked like when it happened.
That's so cool. I found it. That's cool.
Yeah, the whole story in this article is told from the perspective of the first officer on the scene. He's basically telling it the story from his perspective. So I told it a little bit different, and I apologize in advance if some of my details were a bit off. Read at your own risk. It's a dark story, but I felt like it does Christine, Amy, and Suzanne Markle justice to tell this story. So, yeah.
I think Little Rock has such an energy to it. Being from outside of Little Rock, but as somebody who visited several times as a kid, and now I live near Little Rock, I think that it has such an energy that you can pick up on if you believe in that sort of thing. And I think that so much of this kind of stuff happens and it hits the news and everybody, knows about it for a little while and then it goes away. I never would have heard about this because it happened in the 80s. So I'm sure in the 80s, this was all over the news and everybody talked about it. And now just nobody knows. I mean, you could drive past that house and have no idea that anything happened. So I wonder, there's probably a lot more like that, and it kind of contributes to this energy. And I think it's easy to forget how old Little Rock is, too. It is such an old city with buildings that have been there for a century, maybe more. It's really, really neat what kind of history is hiding in our backyard like that.
Yeah, I think about that a lot downtown specifically. All the historic buildings and stuff make me think a lot about the kind of stuff. Like, I went to school at Eastham. If we have any listeners in our youth department, I'm sure you also either go to school at Eastham or know someone who has. The middle school and high school are in historical buildings, the Gazette building and the bank. And I know that sometimes I would just think about that. However, so many years ago, people made newspapers in this building. And now I sit through English class. And I don't know, it's just really cool to think about these buildings and their history. And even if it's not as insane as a murder-suicide, it's still crazy to think the entirely different context of when people looked at this building, it used to be something else.
I feel like there's kids who go to school every day and it's just kind of part of their everyday lives. They go to school in these big buildings downtown, and I go to work in a big building downtown. And it's weird to think that other people had daily lives downtown when those buildings were totally different. Like you were saying, the kid that goes to school every day, it's mundane for them. They're like, yeah, well, I go to school here. Well, there were people who made newspapers there however many years ago. It's interesting to me to think about their regular lives. They just went about their normal daily life, and it's so different, but in the same exact place.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. I love cool history like that.
A piece of machinery where you're sitting in your desk 100 years ago, there was a huge piece of machinery that was mechanical.
And that's how it felt. The high school building downtown, at least when I went there, it was shortly after Eastham had obtained that building. So they had just moved. At first, the high school and middle school were all in one big building, in the Gazette building. And then they bought the lot across the street, which was the bank. I don't remember what bank it was, but it was a bank. And I know this because we had a whole history lesson once about how when they moved out of that bank, it was a huge secret. Like, they didn't tell anybody the day they were doing it because they had to move all the money at once. They couldn't tell anybody when it was going to happen or like how they were going to do it. And in fact, it took several days for the workers at the Gazette building to actually realize that the people weren't coming in every day anymore. I had gone to a new location. But I remember, and it might have changed because they were always kind of doing construction while I was there on and off. But down in the basement of the high school, you could go and see the vault, like the old vault where they kept the money.
Oh, that's cool.
So I had like a class down there, and you could just like go down the hallway and there's like a big vault. There are some things in the building they can't modify, and that's one of them. So you could just go look at this vault, and it's like, this used to be a bank. That's so crazy. And now it's a school.
We still have classes there. Some of my teens still would talk about that. My favorite thing to do when I would go to the Eastham schools and give talks about the library, I would always show them pictures of the state bank or something like that. I can't remember, but I would pull that up and I would show them pictures of the inside because it still looks like a bank. When you first walk in, that building still
waiting room. Yeah.
It's like a lobby. The lobby of the bank is still very recognizable.
That's so cool.
There are like actually pictures, and you can see when people were in there doing their financial business. And I would show that to the teens and be like, this is in that building that we are in right now from like 90 something years ago. I'm not sure if it's quite that much, but it was a long time. And that's fun for everybody to look at.
Oh, yeah.
It's always really interesting. I like to think about, like Hayden said, people living their everyday life. We all live our everyday life. How many people, like when I walk through the library even, which just sounds so cheesy, and I know it's going to sound super cheesy, but when I walk through hallways there, or when I'm down, especially like in the basement of the library in places that seem a little older and haven't been completely redone, you've got to wonder how many other people through the years and years that this has been here have walked exactly the same path that I'm walking right now.
As far as history goes, I don't know if you guys know, but Arkansas is actually very interesting as far as natural history goes, geographical, like geological place. There used to be an ocean. We used to be coastline here in Arkansas. And you can find a lot of really fascinating geological samples and a lot of really fascinating fossil life, like plant and animal fossil life here in Arkansas. I don't know, sometimes I'll just be, this has nothing to do, I guess, with architectural history, but I'll be like in my house sitting, I'm like, probably at some point stood here in this exact spot, a creature that we have no fossil record for. There was probably all kinds of creatures coming through this area, living their lives, going about every day. It just kind of makes your head spin, I guess, a little bit. And even more to think about people. If you guys have ever been to Petit Jean caves with the pictographs on the wall, like Native American pictographs, seen anything like that, it's just
so cool.
It blows your mind to think about not just life, but people. They left their marks and they went through it. This was their everyday coming through, doing this, living their lives. And to them, it was normal. And now, you know.
Here I am.
Yeah,
it's
now
easy to forget how fast history happens. I was thinking about that the other day when I was on Google Street View in kind of our general area here, and I clicked a wrong spot on the street and it took the street view from 2019 to 2013, and it was completely different. It was a field that was empty with a bunch of trees and stuff, and now it's a big, really fancy apartment complex. Even as recently as 2013, it was all fields and trees and stuff. I did one where it was kind of the similar situation. I went on this road and it only went so far of like this paved, really nice road, and the Street View thing came up where it had times, and I went back to 2008 and it was a dead end dirt road and nothing was out there. So I mean, history is happening right now and it's being recorded more efficiently because of all of our technology. So I could see, because of Google Street View, that 5 years ago, this place in 2013 was all completely trees and fields and stuff. It's really interesting to me how efficiently it's being recorded now. You can go see even just something as simple as Street View, like what did this place look like 2 years ago? What about 4 years ago? I figured once we've had Street View for long enough, somebody will be like, what did the street look like 20 years ago? And they can go see. They can look around like they're there. It's very cool to me. I wonder how long it'll be till we can VR into old places.
Dude, I want to so bad. My dad and I play this game where we find places like modern day on Street View, and then we'll try to go back through the archives and find a historical picture from the same perspective so that you can put the pictures side by side and see what the same buildings look like, but like, 100 years ago or something.
That's really cool.
And we'll just send those things back and forth to each other to try to like impress each other. My dad likes to do stuff like all over the country, and I'm usually just like, look at this building, there's a tropical smoothie in it now. Like
I feel like I know which building you're talking about downtown.
Yes. Okay. So that building on Broadway that is
a
tropical smoothie in it now used to be a YMCA.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
It was a residential YMCA. People lived there.
Wow.
And the windows at the top, the next time you're there, check out the windows and how they have metal things on them that make a little diamond design. Those have been there 100 years. Another really cool building like that here in downtown Little Rock is the Mosaic Templars building, also on Broadway.
I know what you're talking about.
That one has also been and looked the same for many, many years. And it has these really great things on the front that say auditorium. And it's chiseled into the side of the building. It says auditorium above the door. And if you walk in there, that's where the auditorium is. And there's another one that says stairs. And there's stairs. They used to make buildings like that to last. So these stairs are going to be here,
Nobody's remodeling this.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a tidbit that I know about a building like that, like that pertains to history, but is not exactly local. It is in the South. And forgive me if I get some of the details on this wrong. I got very excited when I found it and then very sad, so I didn't research it quite as thoroughly. I was looking at how long certain movie theaters have been around, because movie theaters are really interesting buildings anyway, because they have to be massive and, all these different ways that it has to be built. And one of the first movie theaters in the country was on Canal Street in New Orleans. And it was one of the first movie theaters. This is an important piece of history. Everybody has a movie theater within some distance of them. Everybody goes to the movies. One of the very first movie theaters, and now it's a liquor store. They didn't preserve it. You would go past there and have no idea about what it was. It just exists as this little corner store now, and nobody knows. It was one of the first movie theaters that was actually functioning as a movie theater. So it's a really cool piece of cinematic history. I think a hotel down the street has a restaurant named in its honor, but I really wish they would have preserved the building. I don't know if it was built for that, but just the fact that it was used in that piece of important history and you wouldn't know makes me wonder about our more local buildings. Are there buildings that I have no idea had some kind of super cool thing in it, and then we just don't know because they didn't preserve that?
Because nowadays, especially downtown, there's so many regulations on what you can and can't do in a building when doing renovations or modifying, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, you don't, or at least I don't really think about what about before those rules were put in place? How many things were just destroyed?
Yeah.
Destroyed or just not preserved? Because I think it kind of is akin to now how these retail buildings empty out and nobody knows the Toys R Us was a Toys R Us 2 years ago because now ours is an Ollie's, and like you'd have no idea.
I also think that those buildings that were really big in the 30s, the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s, those great, beautifully made, just absolutely gorgeous buildings that we wish were around. At that time, let's say a building was built in the early 1900s or something, and it was built well. It was built of stone and brick, and it was a big building. When the 30s hit, the Great Depression and all of that happened, it wasn't practical to keep those kinds of buildings as movie theaters or as beautiful ballrooms. I was just looking up some information about the Dreamland Ballroom here in Little Rock because that's another place that is just absolutely gorgeous. It's over on 9th Street. It's the Flag and Banner building now. Whenever you're going down the highway, you probably see it. It says Flag and Banner, and it has all the flags and banners.
The flags and the banners? Really?
But that was actually Taborian Hall Museum. It was also known as the Dreamland Ballroom and was a hot spot in Little Rock. Everybody went there to dance, and it was a really popular place, and it's had kind of a tumultuous history. But anyway, all of that to say that at some point it's sad because I think we lost a lot of historic places because it wasn't practical to keep them. It's sad because we're kind of in that time right now. We're in a recession. We're having economic problems as a country, and it's a hard time to keep these historic buildings. I cannot tell you how many places I see. I follow a lot of Facebook groups and the Downtown Association and stuff like that. I always see people trying to save neighborhoods, save historic areas, historic buildings, stuff like that. It's hard to do that.
I think also regulations change for a lot of places. The old pipes and stuff that they used to put in aren't up to code anymore. The old electricity they used to put in aren't up to code anymore. And after a certain point, you can't use a building if nothing is up to code, and you can't upgrade it because these are pipes that are 6 feet of concrete. You have to tear it all out and rebuild it because of the way that the codes are, which
and it costs so much money to restore it back to the way it was while updating it.
And so I think it's a financial thing because I'm sure that if you had unlimited money, your bank account has the infinity symbol, you can just go. I think that you could be like, well, we can probably use these special systems to restore the electricity or whatever without tearing it all down. But
Mr. Bezos, if you're listening.
Right? It's more practical in a lot of situations to just tear it all down and start anew. But that's so sad because you're losing even modern history. Like Sears is about to be totally gone. Yeah. And nobody will know what a Sears was. And people spend a lot of time there. Malls are places where people have a lot of good memories. They spent a lot of time. I go through the mall and it's very different than it was when I was a kid. But is it eventually going to be gone? Is the building going to be gone? Is it going to be up to code anymore? Are we going to do something cool with it? Or are we just going to let it fade away? Are we going to tear it down and put more restaurants there? It's interesting to see even modern history.
It's kind of interesting because to me, that begs the question. Like you said, there comes a point where you have to get rid of something old and replace it with something new. At what point is something history? Everything is history. The lasagna I just ate was part of my history. Still, I'm gonna throw away the empty paper plate. My old house got torn down, and that was really sad for me because that's like where I grew up, but we hadn't lived there for a long time. It was not being kept up, and it wasn't safe. And it wasn't like a good place. Of course, I'm still sad that he got torn down because they tore it down and they built something better there that people could actually live in, that was safe for people to be in. And I kind of think sometimes, yeah, that was like a relevant historical place for me, but it's good that it's gone. I think it's hard with some buildings that are historic relevant or in the neighborhood. Say there's a neighborhood grocery or something that's really important to the people in the neighborhood, but now nobody uses it or they can't afford to keep it up or it's gone dilapidated or whatever, and somebody wants to tear it down and build something nicer. That begs the question, is it worth it to try and save it, or should you let something new be made? It's interesting food for thought.
I wonder, this is an interesting question. Do you think that people, for example, let's say we want to library was empty. Nobody worked there, and the library moved to a better location, and it was just an empty building. And it used to be a factory. It used to be, what else did they say?
Like a general
Store.
Construction type.
Okay, so let's say, for example, that all of those people who had some kind of connection to that business, they're all dead now. But let's say we could talk to them, and we were like, hey, we want to tear down this building. It's in the middle. It's in a prime real estate. We want to build something that's going to benefit the entire community around this area. It's just going to uplift the city. It's going to be a good and positive thing for the city. Do you think that those people who had a connection to that old location would say, no, we don't want you to? Or do you think that they would say, we don't care, we're dead?
I would hope that they would want to see something better go there. I think the tipping point there is what is going to happen to that location. Are they building something better, or are they putting a parking lot there? I think that's kind of, I've had some personal historical significance to some buildings, and rather than we're going to put something much better here, they'll be like, you know what, we're going to put something that no one wants here. We're going to put something that nobody needs, or we're going to tear it down and just leave it. I think that feels different to me than, yes, we want to tear down this house and we want to build a better house. But in some cases, it's like, we're going to tear down this house and we're going to put nothing. It's just going to grow up and be empty. I think it depends on what they plan to do with it. Because I think if they empty it out and put something there that no one wants or no one needs, or they don't put anything there, I think that kind of feels different than if they're going to use it for something really positive.
I also think it would depend on who you ask. If you ask the owner, like say it's the library building and it was a factory, and you ask him, the factory owner, and maybe he's like, you know what, my time is done. The factory is closed. It's out of my hands. But then maybe if you ask the architect who designed the place, the actual physical building, and maybe they would say, whatever, I don't care about the factory, I don't care about the whatever went inside the people were doing there, but the building itself, I designed that, I made that. So make something else, but keep the building intact. And I think that's kind of the idea behind a lot of the restoration rules and stuff at Eastham. And I don't know if we have any rules at the library that we have to follow, things that we can't modify. I know there were a lot at Eastham. The lobby, for example, we did talk about that. The reason it looks like that still is they can't make any more modifications. The chandelier up there and all that, they have to keep it, but it's cool, so it's okay.
It made me remember what I was thinking, like all those people would be like, we don't care. It reminded me of that line from Hamilton where he's like, we honor our treaty, King Louis's head, do whatever you want, I'm super dead.
Yeah, so if you guys built something that became a community center, that became relevant to people, or maybe just a few people, you know, maybe not a whole community, but like a shop, and then you died, and way after your death, eventually the place kind of fell out of public use. It wasn't being used for what you intended for, or it became dilapidated, and people wanted to tear it down and replace it with something else, and they somehow got the Ouija board out and contacted you. What would you say? Would you want, if that was, say, the culmination of your life's work, would you be okay with them as a ghost? People might not even remember that you were the one who built that.
I feel, not strongly, but I feel torn a little bit, because I grew up going to this really, really cool historic building in Searcy, Arkansas. It was actually built in the late 1800s, and it was really, really cool. My family restored it and brought it back up to this really cool glory where it wasn't the same kind of business at all, but it was different in a really cool way. I got to see all kinds of people really enjoy their time there, and they had a lot of fun. And now it's very much not functional. You couldn't really run a business out of it. It's a really old building, and I think somebody bought it recently. And so I had to think to myself, what are they going to do with it? It's going to be so sad to me if they tear it down and put a bunch of office space or something. But at the same time, it was built in the late 1800s. What else can you really do with it at this point? So I've kind of been grappling with a little bit of that personally myself. What's going to happen to this space I thought was so cool? And it's a really unique space. So part of my brain is like, no, you should keep it like that because it's so unique and different. And you could totally do something cool in there. But at the same time, it would cost so much to restore it. And even though it's a really important historical building, like it was the town's mercantile. So that's where everybody went for seeds and plants and building supplies and like things in 1892. And that's cool. But can we do anything with that now? It needs to be relevant. There's no point in keeping an old building if it's not going to be relevant. And I mean, I'm not dead yet, so I guess it doesn't super apply. Like I'm not a ghost, but I don't live there anymore. And so none of that applies to me. What they do with it doesn't really change my life either way. But it is a really interesting concept. If you think about your school or your house or other significant places to you physically, does it matter what happens to it in 100 years? Or is that historical significance all kind of false?
Like, all kind of in your mind.
I would be more upset, I think, as a ghost in this scenario we have created. I would be more upset that this thing fell out of use. If no one was using it, if it was just wasting space or whatever, then reluctantly I'd be like, okay, well,
Yeah.
you know, you can tear it down, you can build something else. I would be more upset, like, people really don't go there anymore? People don't use the thing? You know, like the movie theater example earlier. If I was the ghost of the guy that made the movie theater, not only would I be upset that people didn't use my movie theater for movies anymore, but I'd be upset, like, I'd look down the street and I'd see the Cinemark, and I'd be like, so people still do movies. People still go to the movies.
They just don't want to come
not
here.
mine. What happened? What happened here? That's what I would be thinking about.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like the public is even impacted when they make decisions like that. Like, for instance, the Dollar Theater in North Little Rock was up and going and popular until I was like 20. We went there when I was a teenager all the time, and it was functioning, and then it closed and everybody freaked out because they were like, what's going to happen to the Dollar Theater? And rather than using that space for a theater, even though it was pretty nice, for $1, I'll go see a movie there. They put a Dick's Sporting Goods. I don't care about the sporting goods stores.
Do you guys really make enough money at Dick's Sporting Goods to have an entire movie theater?
The energy in the parking lot and in the general shopping center is very different now, because before it would be like, oh, I have so many good memories here and it's so special, and oh, look, they're playing, you know, the movies from last month, even though they're not new, I can go see them for $1 and that's cool. And now I'm just like, I could buy a trampoline, I guess. I could buy some pants.
An expensive bike. Yeah.
Yes, an expensive bicycle.
I have a weird perspective on this because I just moved out of a house. I've literally just moved in the last few months, as you guys know, from a house that was built in 1890 by a guy named William Davis Holtzman. And he built the house on Ninth Street that I lived in, and it was 130 years old. I remember when I first moved in, I wanted to learn as much as I could about William Davis Holtzman, and I wanted to honor his family and learn about them and be very super grateful energy to live in their house. Like, I wanted to acknowledge them and give them, I don't know, some kind of weird cosmic gratitude. And I did, and I'm glad that I did that. But as I lived there and experienced that history and everything else, I realized that, holy crap, man, this is really hard to live here. It's really hard to live in a space and occupy a space that's that old. And it's not even just because I had obvious problems, like my air conditioning didn't work very well. And really, it was the things that we've talked about where, like, you would have to just completely change them. And in changing those things, it would make the place not the place
no longer. Yeah.
So, like, for example, the staircase there. I was in the apartment. It was a subdivided house that was different apartments. And I had the apartment with the original staircase in it. Now, if you know anything, it's actually from the Edwardian time period. If you know anything about that time period, they had crazy steep staircases. They were very steep and very narrow, and people used to go up and down. Women would wear full-length dresses and go up and down that freaking staircase, and I nearly died every day of my life. I was convinced that I was nervous they were going to find me at the bottom of those stairs. And so in changing that, if the homeowner, who was an amazing, amazing landlord, by the way, just shout out to my landlord there, if you ever hear this, you were the bomb.com. But, you know, if he wanted to say, this is really not practical anymore, someone's going to get hurt on this, I need to take it out and, like, fix it and redo the stairs, it would take every single bit of character out of that house. It wouldn't be Edwardian anymore. It wouldn't be the same type of place. I have a weird perspective where I think William Davis, if we replaced all the windows and took out the old stairs and took out a couple of walls to open it up, and we took all the old plaster down off the walls and we replastered them, or we put drywall up or something, because the walls were made out of old plaster and it was like sand. Like, if I nailed something into the wall would just dissolve like sand. It was crazy. You couldn't pick on the wall. Like, it was literally like you could pick away, you could scrape away the wall. And it was thick. It was just made out of old material. The original walls were old and the windows were old. But even if you could, kind of like how Hayden said, even if you could replace everything, it wouldn't be that place anymore. So I think if I could talk to William Davis Holtzman and his wife and say, hey, I mean, he died. That was the last house he lived in when he died. He lived on 9th Street for his entire life. He built 9 houses, or 6 or 9, I can't remember. But anyway, he built a bunch of houses on 9th Street. And I think that if he were around and he saw you fixing the house or fixing these buildings so that they would work in a modern sense, it wouldn't be those buildings anymore.
And at that point, if it's not the same anymore, then why don't you just tear it down and build something new?
I was also thinking, as we were kind of talking, just to throw this out there, in the pursuit of changing these locations to fit a modern concept, you have to think about your carbon footprint too. Is it better for the environment? You know, these new modern buildings and stuff are made out of materials that are good for the environment. They utilize solar power. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting too. But anyways, couple more facts really quickly about William Davis Holtman, because I have them. His wife, he is buried in Mount Holly Cemetery here in
Oh,
the
wow. I've been there.
Yep, he's buried there with his family. His wife's name is Lena, and she was a German immigrant. It's just really interesting to me that she was a German immigrant and he married her, because back in 1890, I mean, he had been building houses for a long time. So I just know that my house was the last one that he built, and it was built in 1890. So, I mean, in the mid to late 1800s, and he marries a German immigrant woman, which is pretty cool and pretty progressive, honestly, for that time period, because she was an immigrant. But anyway, so he married her, and they had children. I can't remember off the top of my head how many, but I know one of them was named Alfred, and he got married and moved to right outside of Toledo, Ohio, which is where my family is originally from.
Oh,
Whoa.
wow. Look
Yeah.
at that connection. That's
Yeah.
so cool.
I dug into the records before we moved in, and actually, like, from either his draft card or the census, I can't remember which one I got the actual address from. I think it might have been the census. I got his family's address and I typed it into Google Maps, and I did the directions to my mom's house that she grew up in her entire life, and they were 10 minutes apart.
Oh, wow.
That's insane.
The guy who built the house I lived in, his son lived 10 minutes from my mom's house. They lived in that area like 50 to 60 years apart.
You know, and I know people say it all the time, but it really is a small world that we live in.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody is only ever just a few degrees of separation from everybody else.
It's true.
And it's stuff like that that really makes you think. Like you said, your mom lived just
Right
50
down
years apart, but just down the road from the guy whose house you eventually lived in. Or, well, the son of the guy whose house
Yeah.
you eventually lived in. But still.
That's such a cool connection.
I learned all of this, and I remember being on my computer. Shout out to Central Arkansas Library's databases and research tools, because that's how I found out all this information, which is all on our website at cals.org, to plug them real
Yeah.
quick. But I got all that information from our website, cals.org, CALS.org. I got all the information from there, and I remember the night before we were going to move, I was on my computer just looking all this stuff up, and came to that realization and called my mom and was like, oh my God, I can't believe this, and saw his picture and everything. And I definitely felt like I was meant there. And it was a really great time and a really great year. But I will say that if you're thinking of moving into a very, very historical house, you need to come and talk to me, because I got some tips and tricks for you. It's a fun time.
You don't think too much about local history. I think everybody gets this mindset that nothing cool happens where they live, unless they live somewhere cool where cool stuff always happens, like New York or whatever. If you live in like a normal place, you kind of forget. You just don't think about all the crazy stuff that happens or all the connections you have. I definitely would encourage people to look more into just local history, like the history of their homes or the history of their street or their neighborhood. Sometimes you'll be surprised at the stuff you can find.
I literally say that exact thing to teens and adults all the time when I'm trying to encourage them to use the Encyclopedia of Arkansas that we have on our website. People don't think about that as often as I think they should. Literally, you can go onto the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, which you can reach through our website. Again, that's cals.org.
One more time.
If you go on there and you find the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, you can literally type in Hillcrest, and it will bring up pictures and stories and audio recordings, people's personal histories. They record elderly people talking about what it was like to live in Little Rock or live in Hillcrest or live on 9th Street in 1930. You know, 9th Street actually was a famous area for African American folks living there. They had banks, churches, realty places. It was a booming business district for African American people in Little Rock. It is amazing, the history of 9th Street. I could do a whole podcast just on the history of 9th Street and how important it was to the Black community in Little Rock. It was amazing.
I would definitely recommend anybody who spends a lot of time in the downtown area, read the placards. They're all over the place. Read the placards and like look up the name, because it's like I was walking down the street and I saw the name on the ground, a guy named John Martin. And I thought that was funny because I listened to a different podcast with two characters named John and Martin. And I was like, haha. And when I got home, I looked that guy up. This story is kind of sad. It was a memoriam placard. I'm not going to go into the story of John Martin, but I was very intrigued. I never even knew. I walked by, I think it's right by Gus's Chicken, that area of downtown, like where there's 9 placards with people's names on them. Like I went and I looked up all these people and I learned so much. You know, I walk over those names every day and I never even thought to look at them. So it's like, I definitely think if you're interested in local history, just look at those, read the placards. They're all over the place downtown. Look up the people, go to the Historic Arkansas, Encyclopedia of Arkansas, the CALS website. It's
CALS.org.
Really, CALS.org.
Yeah, great. It's cool to know things. I think people, especially young people, don't think that it's cool to know things, but it is because you're not always going to be, this is going to sound, y'all, I'm about to sound so old. Okay, just get ready. I'm about to sound real old. You're not always going to be 16. You're not always going to be 13. You're eventually going to become older, and you're going to be, maybe you won't live in Little Rock. Maybe you'll move far away. Maybe, you know, you hate Little Rock. Lots of people claim to hate the place that they grew up and lived, but you can't argue with the fact that there's a lot of history here, and you're a part of that by being here. You're living here every day, just like those people who were living here every day in, you know, 1890 when Holtzman was building that house. So, like, you're a part of the history. You might as well know who came before you.
Oh, yeah. And in 70 years, you might be...
Yeah, you'll be in the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. They'll be looking at
Yeah,
pictures.
you'll be telling people, well, when I was 13 in Little Rock, I went to school at this school right here, and they'll be like, wow, that's not even a school anymore. And you'll be like, really?
Yeah, people were like, I was at this bank all the time, and they're like, now it's a school. And they're like, what?
Or, you know, maybe one day you hate Little Rock and you move away, you hate Arkansas, you move away. I mean, you can always tell people, I used to live in a house where some people were murdered. Or, like, I used to live in a house where it used to be a bank. Or I used to go to a school that was a newspaper building. How cool is that? It's just fun to know about the world around you, like know what came before you.
Definitely. And you could definitely impress some librarians if you came to the library and told us something that you learned because you heard us talking about it on our podcast, and you were like, yeah, then I went to this thing and told us about it. Like, I think if you do that, if anyone hears this, I'm about to, like, make you an offer. If anyone out there not employed by the library hears this podcast and does that and then comes and tells me about it or reaches out to me on any social media, I will give you something. I don't know what, but I'll give you something.
We'll announce what that something is in our next episode. So you'll have to listen to 2 episodes to know what you get.
There you go. And librarians have cool things. We have cool things.
We have cool stuff. For sure. It sounds so kind of like, hey, I'm a librarian, kid. I got cool stuff. Why don't you tell me a fact about you?
We got more than books. We've got, like, cool stuff. Not that books aren't cool, because they are, but we have more than just that.
Yeah, you know, the ancient proverb, having fun isn't hard if you've got a library card.
That's right.
Exactly.
I think Socrates said that.
Oh.
I think you spelled Arthur wrong.
Definitely Socrates.
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess it's a good wrapping up point. Thank you guys so much for listening. As usual, tune in again next week where Hayden is going to be our topic facilitator, and we will see you guys then. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.